Chapter 40, Wednesday, February 18th, 1778. Escape? She whispered. There's a big celebration at headquarters Sunday night, General Washington's birthday. It'll be just like New York, I said. We'll wait until they're deep in their cups and merrymaking, then run. Her eyes narrowed. If you think I'm running away with you, then your wits have indeed been scrambled. What? She tightened her jaw. I trusted you in Morristown. You lied to me about where we were headed and went behind my back to lay plans for Albany. One of the other cart drivers told me of the plan when he was looking for you. I frowned. Isabel, you lied too, and you stole all our money. You lied first. And yes, I took the money, but halfway to Philadelphia, I felt bad about it, so I went back. You went back for me? No, not for you, just to return your half of the money. Only you weren't there. Glad to be quit of me, I figured. I was not glad to be quit of you. What happened then? She swung the kettle over the fire. When I didn't find you, I left again. Found a nice seamstress to work for in Philadelphia. I saved until I could pay for a spot on the coach to Williamsburg. I was waiting for it in front of the State House when I was grabbed. By Bellingham? She shook her head. The fellow who sold me to him. He was a violent man. She stopped sudden. That's all I'm going to say about that. I was overcome by an unsettling sensation, as if some giant had picked up a whole of the earth and tilted it. She'd been hurt, scattered on the inside of her spirit, and I did not know how to help her. I'm sorry, I said. Dreadful, doleful sorry. The weak words were useless. Since we'd parted in Morristown, she'd been alone and in the worst sort of misery. No wonder she'd treated me ill. I cleared my throat. We have a plan for Sunday. The candlelight jumped and played on the walls, making our shadows as tall as the ceiling. 2 tears escaped her eyes. One fell to the floor, the other dropped into the folds of the cloth wrapped around her shoulders and neck. I can't go, she said. Of course you can. We'll stay together every step, I swear. We'll head for Baltimore or... Hush. She wiped her eyes and shook her head. I already tried to run away. 3 times. She reached for her neckcloth. Master Bellingham took me to a blacksmith. She found the loose end of her cloth and began unwrapping it, and paid the man to forge this. She let the cloth fall to the ground. An iron band circled her neck, fastened there by a lock that hung like a hideous jewel. This collar was as good as chains around her ankles. It would alert the world of her circumstance and make escape even harder. Bellingham wears a key and a cord around his neck. There's a slot in the back for the bells, she exclaimed. You've seen Gideon carrying them. He locks them into the collar whenever I leave the house. The ladies I sew for say they gave off musical tones when I walk. Her voice choked with anger. They find the sound delightful. The ground under my feet tilted farther. I felt like I was falling down the dank, endless well, stone walls closing in around me, darkness stealing away my breath. Isabel waited in silence. It changes nothing, I finally said. We'll find a way to remove it once we're far away. Any blacksmith you approach would have us arrested and pocket the reward. My only hope is to fool him into thinking that I've changed, so we'll take this off someday. That's when I'll escape. She picked up the long cloth from the floor. You'll have to run alone. If you do, mind your mouth. It always makes trouble for you. Gideon opened the door before I could respond, his bug eyes wider than usual. Is the tea ready? How much did he hear? Nearly, Isabel lied. Your witless friend here can take it up to the gentleman, Gideon said smoothly. I'll prepare the table. Isabel rewrapped her neckcloth. Would you fetch some wood for the fire, Curzon? Chapter 41, Wednesday, February 18th to Sunday, February 22nd, 1778. By the time I brought the wood in, Isabella loaded the tray with the teapot and 3 cups and saucers. For Misters Bellingham, Dana, and Folsom, she said as I picked it up. Top of the stairs to the right. My jumbled conjugations of horror and despair left me speechless. All I could do was nod. I carried the tray to the gentleman's bedchamber and knocked before entering. The dim light of the single candle left most of the small room in shadows, but I could see that the bed was intended for 2 bodies and contained 3. Valley Forge was so crowded, even congressmen had to bunk together. Mr. Dana stood up and made his way to the washstand as I crossed the threshold. Mr. Bellingham gave a groan and turned over. "Careful, lad," Mr. Folsom sat up, pulling his nightcap and scratching at his short hair that stood up like porcupine quills. "Not much room for stepping." "Not much, sir." I picked my way through the confusion of boots, trunks, chairs, and discarded clothing on the floor. "May I stack these books?" "Just leave the tea and be gone," Bellingham grumbled into his pillow. I balanced the tray in one hand and made space on the small table by piling the books scattered there. After I set the tray down, I lit a second and third candle. Mr. Dana tapped with his knuckles to break the thin layer of ice atop the water of the washing up basin. "Don't suppose we could get some warm water for the washing?" "Get on with it, you coward," Mr. Folsom said. "Ice water builds character. Didn't your mother ever tell you that?" Mr. Dana splashed the water on his face and grunted. "Shall I pour the tea, gentlemen?" I asked. "No," Bellingham finally sat up. "Go down and make sure that fire is roaring." I bowed, not trusting myself to speak to him. "Wait!" Mr. Dana wiped his hands on a rag, crouched at the side of the bed, and drew out the chamber pot. It had been used in the night. "Take care of this, will you?" I took the chamber pot from him. I wanted to turn it upside down on Bellingham's head, drag him out of the bed, down the stairs, and into the snow, where I could horsewhip him until he understood what Isabel had suffered. "Are you ill?" Bellingham asked. "Is your head still muddled?" "Oh, no, sir," I said. "My head is clear." I determined then to begin a mutiny. When the gentlemen were breakfasting, I made up their bed, taking care to sprinkle mouse droppings on their mattress first. I emptied the chamber pot, but did not rinse it clean before I replaced it under the bed. I stuffed my muddy shoe on a fallen shirt, fallen to the floor, and kicked it to the corner. When the gentlemen left for the headquarters, I spilled half of a cup of tea across their papers, then covered their mess with several ledgers. I closed the fireplace flue to make the dining room smoky, then complained about it to Gideon, who opened the flue and all the windows to air out the room. When the gentlemen returned for their dinner, they had to eat it with their coats and gloves on, for it was as cold inside as out. Gideon received the scolding for this, which was an unexpected bonus for me. I continued my insurrection for several days, all the while plotting my escape. The iron collar around Isabel's neck meant that I would have to escape first, then find a foolproof way to cast off the collar and take her with me. I ate all the food I could take at every meal to strengthen myself for the running. Breakfast was 2 bowls of porridge and bread topped with molasses and butter. Dinners and suppers always had some sort of roasted or stewed meat and plenty of turnips. Mrs. Cook took pleasure in my appetite and baked 2 apple pies for me. I tasted guilt whenever I thought of Ebenezer and the others, but I ate until my belly ached. I prepared Bellingham's clothes for the General's birthday celebration with great care. I brushed most of the dirt from his jacket, but snipped a few threads from the buttons in the hopes that 1 or 2 might pop off in the course of the evening. I polished his shoes, picked off the lint from his black breeches, and inserted a pinch of wood shavings into the toes of his stockings so that his feet would itch all night. Once I finished dressing him, Bellingham said that he wanted me to lead his horse to headquarters. Mr. Folsom frowned as he heard this, surprised, perhaps, that Bellingham was vain enough to parade his wealth before the general. I was dismayed. I had not thought he would require me. My plan was to wait a few hours, tell Gideon I had a belly complaint and would be spending the night in the privy, and run as far as I could until dawn. When the gentlemen were all mounted, Bellingham waved the others ahead. Once they were out of sight, he said, "All right then, Curzon, walk on." I took the horse's reins and gently pulled so that she walked alongside me. The falling rain was on the edge of turning into ice. I raised the lantern so I could better see the road. "How do you find Isabel?" Bellingham asked after a mile of walking. His voice startled both the horse and me. I slowed until she calmed some, then resumed my pace. "Isabel seems fine enough." "Gideon tells me that she showed you her collar," he said, a half mile later. "Did she?" "Yes, sir." "She's quite good with the needle," he said, "much too valuable to let her slip away." "You're a wise man of business, sir." "Do not mock me," he snapped. "Stop the horse." I tugged on the reins. The horse halted and snorted, her breath turning to frosty smoke. We were close enough to the bridge to hear the faint sound of the hammers pounding in the artisans' workshops. "My patience is at an end, Curzon. Did you think I wouldn't know who ruined the reports on the table, turned the dining room into a smokehouse, and muddied my best shirt? What's next? Serving me curdled milk? Poison? No, sir. I thought not, he said, because you're running away, tonight, correct? Gideon. Allow me to explain a few things. I purchased Isabel for my wife's use, but then Lorna died. When I realized how much I could earn from the girl's sewing skills, I decided to keep her. Though she has that troublesome inclination to run away, she's valuable, as are you, except for the rebellious notions that have infected your mind. I will kill you slowly, I thought. He dug his heels into the mare's flanks. Walk on, Curzon. I do not want to greet the general looking like I just climbed out of the river. I took the horse's reins again and concentrated on placing one foot in front of the other. Everything is trade, you know, even between master and a servant, Bellingham said. When you offer me honest labor and dutiful behavior, you earn my kindness. For your recent treatment of me, I should pay you back with a beating. But I suspect pain holds little fear for you after what the army has put you through. I've been pondering this predicament for days and have finally hit upon the perfect solution. The horse hesitated as we stepped into the bridge that spanned Valley Creek. Bellingham kicked her again. Are you listening carefully? Yes, sir. Your punishments shall be given to Isabel. Pardon me, sir? Every time you behave improperly, she will suffer. If you deserve a slap, I shall slap her. If you earn a night in the stocks, she will serve out the term. And if you are stupid enough to run away, her pain, Curzon, will never end. Chapter 42, Sunday, February 22nd, 1778. Do you understand? Bile had risen in my throat. I swallowed it. I understand, sir. Excellent. We shall speak no more of it. Headquarters lay just ahead, ablaze with candle and lantern light. Bellingham dismounted at the bottom of the path that led to the front door of the small stone house. He smoothed his breeches, then removed his gloves and handed them to me. Do I look suitable for a dinner with His Excellency and Lady Washington? Heavy shadows lay under his eyes. His face was not as whisker-free as it ought to be for such an occasion. A stain on his neckcloth was apparent even in the half-darkness, and his wig was in dire need of pomading. If I may, sir, I said, I should like to adjust. There's a stain visible, I pointed. Of course. I tugged at the fabric to loosen the silk cloth that wrapped around his neck. The sounds of the soldiers and officers around us, the noise of the bustling kitchen in the building behind headquarters, and the pitch-high laugh of some officer's wife, they all faded, overpowered by the screaming in my head. My fingers. My hands were so close to the cord around his neck that held the key to the iron collar, the cord that deserved to be tightened like a noose. Aren't you done? He asked impatiently. The voices flooded back, as did the light from the campfires of the general's lifeguard. Almost, sir. I refolded the neckcloth to cover the stain and stepped back. Better? He asked. Much better, sir. I'll have Isabel clean that tomorrow. Splendid. See if you can scare up some oats for this old girl, he patted to the horse, and should be victuals for you behind the kitchen. Keep an eye out for that Billy Lee, the general's manservant. It would be good for us if you could establish a friendship with him. I shall do my best, sir. I waited until he disappeared through the door, then led the horse to the barn and found a handful of oats and a bucket of water for her. A servant offered me a mug of hot toddy. I drank it down, declined his offer of a game of cards, and stared into the dark. One of Benny Edwards' favorite stories was about a fellow who stole fire from the old gods and brought it to the people who were cold. I couldn't remember his name. He was caught, of course. The gods chained him to a rock to punish him. Every day an eagle was sent to peck out the fellow's liver. Every night the liver grew back, so he did not die. The torture started anew each morning, all because he stole something that should have been his to begin with. When Benny finished his story, Sylvanus said, if it had been him, he would have bashed his own head into the rock until he was dead. Aaron Barry said he would have grabbed the eagle and eaten it. The rest of the fellows were quiet, including me, because I did not know what I would have done if someone shackled me to a mountain and set an eagle to eat my insides day after day after day. Now I knew. I would fight the eagle and the chains and that mountain as long as I had breath. Chapter 43, Monday, February 23rd to Tuesday, March 17th, 1778. We were at war in the weeks that followed, Bellingham and me, a stage play of a war. He acted the part of a kind-hearted master, but was secretly armed with the ability to hurt Isabel. My role was the slow-witted, dutiful servant. Bellingham did not hire me out even for one day, so the inhabitants of Moor Hall became my weapons. As Bellingham had requested, I lavished extra attention and care upon Mr. Morris and Mr. Reed, always making sure that the best pieces of meat were set upon their plates and their glasses stayed full. I fashioned a stool for Mr. Morris to rest his sore ankle upon after he slipped on the ice. I sharpened Mr. Reed's quills, for he never took the time to do it himself. When Mr. Morris asked me to care for his boots, I won a skirmish. When I put all of his clothes to rights, removing the stubborn stains and unpleasant odors from his breeches, he expressed his gratitude with a coin and complimented Bellingham on the quality of his servant. That won me a minor battle and earned me the duties of cleaning all the gentlemen's clothing. Bellingham was clever enough not to trust my transformation back into obedience. He was shaved each day by Gideon and rarely allowed me in the same room with him if he was alone. My ears were my valued allies. When the plates and glasses were all filled, and I was required to stand in the corner of the dining room and wait for the next order, I'd fix my eyes upon a spot in the wall and stare as if I were a bit addled. In truth, I was listening close to the conversating, waiting for information that would help break free from the mountain. Much of what I heard had more meaning for the soldiers shivering in their huts than for me. The causes for our starving times were many. The men in charge of supplying the army had not prepared for the winter encampment. The army didn't have enough wagons to deliver food in camp, nor enough money to pay for it. And the local people had already sold their grain and meat to the British, forcing supplies to come from great distances. And to top it all off, there was no salt to be had, which made preserving meat and fish for the journey to camp near impossible. There were some 11,000 soldiers at camp, making Valley Forge the third biggest city in America, according to Mr. Folsom. To feed them proper required 1,000,000 pounds of bread and 1,000,000 pounds of meat every month. I had no notion of what 1,000,000 was, but I knew it was a vast sum. The gentlemen agreed that the fellows who had been running the offices of the quartermaster and commissary would all be shot. Dinner the next night was rabbit pie and more of Mrs. Cook's turnips, which the gentlemen were fast tiring of. The talk centered on a battalion of black and Indian soldiers being assembled in Rhode Island, news that I could not wait to tell Isabel. The state was largely occupied by the British, and the Patriots could not find enough men to fill the ranks of their continental brigades. The Rhode Island Assembly had passed a law to free slaves if they served for the entire war. They offered to pay the owners of the new soldiers 120 pounds for the loss of their property. This seemed to me a much sensible solution to so many problems. I could not figure why it created discord or why the other states did not follow suit. Mr. Morris then told of a recruitment plan he'd heard that day, a notion put forth by John Lawrence, an aide-de-camp of General Washington. Lawrence claims that if the army doesn't double or triple in size, the war could drag on for years. He, too, wants to enlist and arm slaves who are willing to fight. He points to general acceptance of the hundreds of free Negroes here in camp as evidence that it would not cause any problems. "Ha!" snorted Mr. Dana. "What of their masters? How are they to be compensated?" "Young Mr. Lawrence has thought this through most carefully," said Mr. Morris. "He says the government should compensate the slave owners a fair price for each man who goes into the army, just as they have done in Rhode Island. He thinks it might be a way to stop slaves from escaping and joining the British. A growing number seem determined to back whichever side grants them liberty. We've quite enough trouble with the British. To raise an issue of freedom for slaves right now would be setting a spark to gunpowder." Mr. Reed lifted his glass. "Cheers." I fought to keep my face plain and dull as the rest of the men returned to the toast. The more I pondered it, the angrier I became. I stole a glance at Gideon. Slaves who were not friends could still share common sentiment about the injustices they suffered. Gideon stood as straight and stiff as a statue. His eyelids did not flicker as the congressman scorned the ideas of John Lawrence. He did not breathe deeper or faster or clench his fists or to contain his anger. The gentlemen could have been discussing the age of turnips on their plates and the chance of snow on the morrow. His reaction, or rather the absence of any reaction, made me more curious than ever about Gideon. I resolved to study his actions as carefully as I studied those of my captors. Chapter 44, Wednesday, March 18th to Sunday, March 22nd, 1778. I examined everything that Gideon owned the next morning when he drove Isabel to her duties at Mrs. Shippen's. He possessed 3 blankets, 4 fine shirts, 2 extra pair of breeches with expensive knee buckles, and a blade for shaving his face. I found nothing that gave an indication of his character. No cards or gaming pieces, nothing for praying or for sport or for remembering someone far away. The only curious thing was a letter folded small and hidden inside his second-best breeches. Mrs. Cook once asked Gideon to read a page of a newspaper to her when Isabel was busy. Gideon had said then that he could not read. I couldn't either, so I had no idea what the letter contained or who sent it or why he would keep such a thing. I carefully folded it again and hid it back in the breeches. After that, I kept track of the amount of time Gideon spent on errands to headquarters or the market stalls on Sullivan's Bridge. More than half the time he tarried, sometimes returning much later than he ought. He was never spoken to about this. The gentleman and Mrs. Cook all assumed he was doing the wishes of one of the generals or aides to His Excellency. As his real master was a day's ride away, there was no true accounting of his comings and goings. I suspected he was courting a girl, one of Lady Washington's maids, or a girl who worked for one of the regiments because her father or brother served in the company. I hoped it meant he was courting a girl, for Isabel was becoming too familiar with him. She allowed him to stand disrespectfully close when they talked, and they laughed when he tried to be funny, though he never said a single clever thing. I was beginning to loathe all things about Gideon. Winter returned with a bitter vengeance on the 22nd day of March, 37 days after Bellingham stole my life from me. Congressmen Dana and Folsom refused to let the thick ice on the road in front of Moore Hall interfere with their plans to leave for York that morning. Gideon and I wrapped a rope around our shoes to give us a better grip on the ground as we carried their trunks and boxes to the wagon. Though normally a strong enough fellow, Gideon struggled with his end. He coughed heavily and shook with chills when it was warm enough from our exertions to be sweating. "Have you had the smallpox?" I asked him. "I do not have the smallpox." "You look sickly to me." Gideon ignored me. "Go upstairs and turn the mattress in the Greens' bedchamber. Make sure Isabel is dusted and clean the windows." He paused to cough some more. "I'm off with a wagon to collect their belongings. If the room's not ready when I return, the blame is all yours." General Nathaniel Greene and his young wife were moving into the empty bedchamber. General Greene was taking over the quartermaster general's position and would be in charge of purchasing and delivering the food and other requirements for the army. By fetching their belongings, Gideon was wasting no time assuming the role as the general's manservant. After I had turned the mattress, there was wood to be split, manure to be shoveled in the barn, and all manner of chores requested by Mrs. Cook. A fat-nosed junior officer delivered a message for Bellingham mid-morning and said he was instructed to wait for a reply. I'd been so busy that I'd lost track of Bellingham. I did not think he was at Moore Hall. He was not in the parlor or dining room. "They said he was here," the lad insisted. "I can't go back without a response. I'll wait in the kitchen." I took the stairs 2 at a time, determined to prove the fellow wrong. I opened the door to Bellingham's bedchamber without knocking, so certain was I that the room would be empty. I was wrong. Bellingham sat in the chair, a towel tied around his neck and his face well soaped on one side. Isabel stood next to the chair, the lathering brush in her hand. Bellingham was not pleased. "Since when do you enter my chamber without knocking?" "Apologies, sir," I said hastily. "A messenger has come from General Varnum. He requires that you write a reply." "He'll have to wait then," Bellingham answered. "I'm in the need of a shave and Gideon won't be back for hours." "I could have helped you, sir." "I do not want your help," Bellingham motioned to Isabel. "Finish this side, please." She dipped the brush in the soapy water, then leaned over it and rubbed it on Bellingham's face. "Shall I fetch paper and pen so you can write your reply, sir?" I asked. "General Varnum is getting rather full of himself." Bellingham placed his hand on Isabel's hip. "His messenger can wait until I'm finished." "Take your hand off her, you foul whoreson." "Of course, sir," I said. Isabel set the lather brush on the bowl, her face hard as stone. "Since you're here, Curzon, there's mud dried on my blue coat. Take care of it." He patted Isabel's backside. "Be quick, Isabel. The Greens will arrive soon." As Isabel reached for the razor, Bellingham closed his eyes, as was his custom whilst being shaved. He did not see the way she gripped the handle of the blade or the look in her eyes. She was not going to shave his whiskers. She was going to slice open his throat. Two thoughts collided in my mind like cannonballs. That I would cheer when the job was done, and that I had to stop her, because our punishment would be swift and merciless. The latter would be carried more force and drove me to action. "Mr. Bellingham, sir, if I may." I quickly crossed the room. "Isabel knows how to pluck chickens and shear sheep, but not how to shave the face of a gentleman. On other occasion it might not matter if your face was nicked or a patch of whiskers was overlooked, but it will today. Allow me, sir, so that you might look your best." I put out my hand for the blade. "I suppose you're right." Bellingham sighed and patted Isabel again. "Give it to him, girl, then ask the cook if she has any of that cobbler left." Isabel handed me the razor. The horn handle was sweaty and warm. Bellingham studied her backside as she rinsed her hands and dried them on her apron. I held up the blade so that it flashed in the light from the window. "May I, sir?" "Of course," he said, closing his eyes again and tilting the back of his head. "What else is being done to prepare for Green's arrival?" "I asked the cook to bake up a nutmeg cake," Isabel said. "It's said to be Mrs. Green's favorite." "Excellent notion, Isabel," Bellingham said. "Find out what General Green prefers on his plate, too. Our interests lie with him now, instead of the congressman. We must do whatever we can to ensure his comfort and keep his wife content." "I shall learn all that I can, sir," Isabel said. "Good girl," he pointed at his face. "Make haste, Curzon. The soap is drying and it itches."